Okay, so when last we met, we talked about the first half of Zechariah, um, the middle prophet in the post-exilic threesome, and we talked about the completion of the temple. And as we finished up last week, we talked about the comparison of the Solomon temple and the what is often called the Zerubbabel temple or the rebuilt temple. We did not get into a discussion of Herod's temple, which is the New Testament temple. We'll get to that at the end of our study. So hold those thoughts about the temple and we'll come back around to that part of the discussion. But today we're back with Zechariah. And Zechariah is a different kind of prophet. He's very apocalyptic, he's very messianic, he's very poetic, and he's in the second part of his book, he's going to be all of those things. The first part of Zechariah was presented during the time of the rebuilding of the temple. So in 520, 518, those kinds of dates. Now, much time has passed. The second part of Zechariah is written at a much later date, maybe 490, 480, something like that. And to help us with the timeline, I did another handout. I'm going to assume that you have the handout in front of you. The handout is, again, just selected dates that I think are important. At the top, you see it starts with Cyrus letting the remnant first return come back in 538. And then you see the length of King Darius's reign. He's the whole first half of this list of dates. And Haggai and Zechariah prophesying in the rebuilding of the temple in 516. Also, you'll see in there that I've put in the Persians conquer the Indus Valley. That's over in India. They are still expanding their empire. They are still very much being the aggressive expansionists. But they reach all the way over into India. Then last week we talked a little bit about Tatnai's report to the Persian king. Then the temple completed. Then you see the Persians expanding north and west into Scythia, and then over into Thrace and Macedonia. I did list the Greeks' defeat of Persia at Marathon. This was a little setback the Persians had. And the reason I listed it is that battle at Marathon is such a famous battle. You've probably heard of it. So I put it there so you'd know about when it's happening. And today we're going to talk about Zechariah's final messages. Then you see the Greeks, after their little setback, they come back. That shouldn't be the Greeks invade. That should be the Persians invade Greece. Sorry, that's a mistake on that. I'll fix it. Persia invades Greece and destroys Athens. So this is the time period that we're looking at today. This is 490, 480 BC. Persia is still very much in charge and expanding their borders. And the people, the remnant, have been back in the land for 50 or more years now. Temple's been in place for like maybe 35 years. So it's been a while. They've been there for a while. The next generation has grown up. There are new leaders in Jerusalem. It still, of course, belongs to Persia. There is no king of the Jewish people because they are the possession of Persia. And Zechariah is an old man now. We said he was probably a young guy when he did his first messages. Now he's an older fellow. And he hasn't heard a word from God in decades. Meanwhile, the people have returned to their old ways. There's idolatry, there's waywardness, there's injustice, there are idols and divinations, and there are leaders that are not faithful to God in Jerusalem. So that brings us to chapter 9. We're going to cover these last prophecies of Zechariah today, chapters 9 through 14. So we are going to hit them in summary fashion. They will be quick hits as we go through here. We're not going to try to map out all the possibilities of what these prophecies mean. Many of the commentators I read map these prophecies to Alexander the Great and his move through this part of the world, or even Romans. But we're not going to try to do that today. We're going to try to look at the big picture. These are sometimes called Zechariah's eschatological oracles. I mentioned to you before that the post-exilic people are in that situation of now and not yet. Part of the promises have happened, but not all of them. So here are God's people with the temple built, back in their homeland, but things aren't very good for them right now. Persia is taxing them heavily, and things are difficult. And in that moment, God speaks to Zechariah again and gives him a series of messages that I think you're going to enjoy. These are good ones. So these chapters 9 through 14 can be divided into two segments. The first 9 through 11 chapters are describing the struggles, and then the chapters 12 through 14 will be more focused on God's reign over the people. You'll notice that this is dense with messianic imagery, and it is often quoted in the New Testament, so some of these verses will sound strangely familiar to you. Now, chapter 9 opens with prophecies about the enemies of Jerusalem. This is going to sound a whole lot like Amos to you. When Amos started with, the doom to the Assyrians and the doom to the Elamites and the doom to all of the groups around him. This is the way this chapter starts it well. And the word of the Lord is against the land of Hadrach. And you see, then he goes on and he talks about other groups. Then down in verse 3, Tyre has built herself a stronghold. She has heaped up silver like dust and gold like the dirt of the streets. Tyre is that island fortress that the Phoenicians use as their base of operations for all of their commerce, and they are filthy rich and feel like they're absolutely impregnable. And at this point in history, they are flying high. Maybe as we move forward, we'll have a chance to talk about Alexander the Great's conquering of Tyre. It's a great story. But anyway, so then it goes on. Verse 5, Ashkelon, Gaza, Ekron, Ashdod. Those are 4 of the 5 Philistine cities. And they also are listed here as lined up to be defeated. An interesting thing, though, there in verse 6, so I'll put an end to the pride of the Philistines. But then it says in verse 7, I will take the blood from their mouths, the forbidden food from between their teeth, and those who are left will belong to our God and become a clan in Judah, and Ekron will be like the Jebusites. The Jebusites were people who lived in Jerusalem before David conquered it. And they eventually just got folded in to the people of God. This seems to be indicating that people from Philistia will also get folded into the house of God. Then it ends, verse 8 here, this section ends with, I will encamp at my temple to guard it against marauding forces. Never again will an oppressor overrun my people, for now I am keeping watch. This is a promise from God that he will eventually take care of them and things are going to turn out okay in the end. As I mentioned, this is eschatological, the fancy word for end times. This is God assuring his people that eventually everything will work for good. He will set all things right. The next section, 9:19 through 17, is very much like a psalm of praise. So it starts with a call to praise, and then it moves into a word of deliverance and encouragement. Look at this call to praise. I think this will sound familiar to you. Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. I will take away the chariots from Ephraim, the war horses from Jerusalem, and the battle bow will be broken. He will proclaim peace to the nations. His rule will extend from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. I think you'll recognize that, from the triumphal entry in the New Testament. Then it moves into the word of deliverance and encouragement. Because the blood of my covenant with you, I will free your prisoners from the waterless pit. This is also quoted in Matthew, and it points back to the covenant and forward to the cross. Interestingly, you may notice that down in verse 13, Greece is mentioned, and Greece is only just now coming on to the radar of the Persians. And this is during the time when the Persians begin to battle with Greece. Interesting that Zechariah has a mention of them in his prophecies. The next section, let's see. In my Bible, the subhead is the Lord will appear. So then the Lord will appear over them. His arrow will flash like lightning. The sovereign Lord will sound the trumpet, and he will march in the storms of the south, and the Lord Almighty will shield them. They will destroy and overcome with sling stones. They will drink and roar as with wine. They will be full like a bowl used for sprinkling the corners of the altar. The Lord their God will save his people on that day as a shepherd saves his flock. They will sparkle in his land like jewels in a crown. Uh, this is beautiful language about Yahweh as a divine warrior, and all creation responds to him. Now, if you move to chapter 10, this is more of the discussion of Yahweh as a good shepherd. And one of the things that I noticed in the resources is that shepherd is very often a term used for a king, a glorious king. So here we'll see some more of that kind of language. And this chapter is interesting because it brings up idolatry again. It brings up the use of idols and divinations. That's not a common theme in post-exilic literature, but it's undeniably here. So ask the Lord for rain in the springtime. That is, don't ask Baal or your household gods. It is the Lord who sends the thunderstorms. He gives showers of rain to all people and plants of the field to everyone. The idols speak deceitfully. Diviners see visions that lie. They tell dreams that are false. They give comfort in vain. Therefore, the people wander like sheep, oppressed for lack of a shepherd. More language that probably sounds familiar to you from the New Testament. Now we're going to get into a section where there's prophecy against leaders who are not leading the people to God. My anger burns against the shepherds, and I will punish the leaders, for the Lord Almighty will care for his flock, the people of Judah, and make them like a proud horse in battle. From Judah will come the cornerstone, from him the tent peg, from him the battle bow, from him every ruler. These are words that are associated with the Messiah. Together they will be like warriors in battle, trampling their enemy into the mud of the street. They will fight because the Lord is with them. Okay, more language about Yahweh as a good shepherd and a divine warrior. Now let's see. Look down in verse 9. Though I scatter them among the peoples, yet in distant lands they will remember me. They and their children will survive, and they will return. I will bring them back from Egypt and gather them from Assyria. I will bring them to Gilead and Lebanon, and there will not be room enough for them. They will pass through the sea of trouble. Surging sea will be subdued, and all the depths of the Nile will dry up. Assyria's pride will be brought down, and Egypt's scepter will pass away. This is interesting language, and there's a lot of debate about exactly what this is talking about. Apparently, the remnant isn't all that God desires. He wants all people. And so, we know that the Jews were dispersed all over the map. And, particularly in Roman times, they were located in every country. Some of the commentators say this is the prophecy that God will come and bless them, and they will be returned to him from all parts of the world. Other commentators say this is talking about it won't just be the remnant, it will be all of the children of Israel. And still others say This is all the people of the world that God will gather together. We know that he has said that in many other verses. And the passing through the sea of trouble, the surging sea subdued, all of that, I think, is designed to make them remember the Exodus when they were escaping from Egypt long ago. So this is beautiful imagery describing God's faithfulness to his people. All right, now look at chapter 11. Chapter 11 is a little bit different. You know how other prophets are called to live out their prophecies? You know, Hosea married Gomer and lived out the prophecies God had for the people. Ezekiel is famous for acting things out in his prophecies. Well, it may be that Zechariah acted this out because he talks about becoming a shepherd. So look, it opens with beautiful language here. Open your doors, Lebanon, so that the fire may devour your cedars. Wail, you juniper, for the cedar has fallen, the stately trees are ruined. Trees apparently here are representative of the leaders of the people. And the prophecy is that they will fall. They will not be sustained. They are not God's people, and he will not take care of them, so they will pass away. Wail, oaks of Bashan, the dense forest has been cut down. Listen to the wail of the shepherds. Their rich pastures are destroyed. Listen to the roar of the lions. The lush thicket of the Jordan is ruined. One commentator said the shepherds were the kings and the lions were the Jewish leaders. I don't know about that, but this is a clear prophecy that the leaders are not to be followed. And then we get this story about the shepherd, starting in verse 4. This is what the Lord my God says: shepherd the flock marked for slaughter. Their buyers slaughter them and go unpunished. Those who sell them say, praise the Lord, I am rich. Their own shepherds do not spare them, for I will no longer have pity on the people of the land, declares the Lord. I will give everyone into the hands of their neighbors and their king. They will devastate the land, and I will not rescue anyone from their hand. So I shepherded the flock marked for slaughter, particularly the oppressed of the flock. Then I took 2 staffs, and I called one favor and the other union, and I shepherded the flock. In 1 month, I got rid of 3 shepherds. The flock detested me, and I grew weary of them and said, I will not be your shepherd. Let the dying die and the perishing perish. Let those who are left eat one another's flesh. Then I took my staff called favor and broke it, revoking the covenant I had made with all nations. It was revoked on that day, and so the oppressed of the flock who were watching me knew it was the word of the Lord. Then I told them, if you think it best, give me my pay, but if not, keep it. So they paid me 30 pieces of silver. That should sound familiar to you, 30 pieces of silver. I did read one interesting thing. Apparently 30 shekels was the price paid to a slave owner if an ox gores a slave. So it was the price of a slave. That references Exodus 23:32. That is really I don't think I'd ever heard that before. And that is really interesting when you think about Judas selling out Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave. So the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter. The handsome price, that's sarcasm, the handsome price at which they valued me. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them to the potter at the house of the Lord. We know, Judas's 30 pieces of silver were used to buy a potter's field. Interesting. Then I broke my second staff called Union, breaking the family bond between Judah and Israel. Then he goes on and he says, then the Lord said to me, take again the equipment of a foolish shepherd, for I am going to raise up a shepherd over the land who will not care for the lost or seek the young or heal the injured or feed the healthy, but will eat the meat of choice sheep, tearing off their hooves. Woe to the worthless shepherd who deserts the flock. May the sword strike his arm and his right eye. May his arm be completely withered, his right eye totally blinded. So this is a description of shepherds and good shepherds versus bad shepherds. And the Lord is making a point that he will send a good shepherd, but in the meantime, there are bad shepherds who should not be followed. Okay, that's the first half of Zechariah's message. Now, the second half is much better news. This is all about God bringing his people victory, bringing them home, the plan fulfilled. The phrase on that day will appear 17 times in the next 3 chapters. And I have a list of the references if you want them, but since we're short on time, I'll keep going. 12 starts like this. The Lord stretches out the heavens, who lays the foundation, the Lord who stretches out the heavens, who lays the foundation of the earth, and who forms the human spirit within a person. Isn't that a wonderful description of God? I think I'm going to highlight that and come back and study that a little more completely because it's such a rich description of God. Now then, there are 4 references to Jerusalem. First, as a cup, then as an immovable rock, then as a strong person, and then as a fire pot. And the Lord is going to see them through tough times. God is still in charge, and they need to live in hope even though the times are perilous. Then look down in verse 10. I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced. They will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son. On that day, the weeping in Jerusalem will be great, as the weeping in Hadad Rimmon on the plain of Megiddo. So here's language that should sound familiar to you. Messianic language about the Christ. Okay, chapter 13. This is about the cleansing of the people. Starts off talking about a fountain that will cleanse them from sin and impurity. Then it goes on to say in verse 2, I will remove the prophets and the spirit of impurity from the land. And if anyone still prophesies, their father and mother to whom they were born will say to them, you must die because you've told lies in the Lord's name. Then their own parents will stab the one who prophesies. This is about getting rid of false prophets. And by the way, the word stab there is the same word that we read had pierced a little bit earlier. Then you move down into the shepherd struck, the sheep scattered. Strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. 2/3 will be struck down and perish, and 1/3 will be left. The third I will put into the fire, and I will refine them like silver, test them like gold. This seems to be talking about the fact that purification will come. You may remember Jesus saying, "Whoever believes in me, as the scripture said, out of his heart will flow streams or rivers of living water." And he talks about living water when he talks to the woman at the well in Samaria. And this chapter talks a lot about the fountain, the flowing waters, the cleansing waters for the people. Then chapter 14, the last of this section. This is a time when there's no wall around Jerusalem. There's deep insecurity, vulnerability, fear. And this message is to encourage them to trust God to take care of them. A day of the Lord is coming, Jerusalem, when your possessions will be plundered and divided up within your very walls. I will gather up the nations to Jerusalem to fight against it. Things are going to be tough. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations. Then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. And on that day, there will be neither sunlight nor cold, frosty darkness. It will be a unique day, a day known only to the Lord, with no distinction between day and night. When evening comes, there will be light. And on that day, so he keeps saying, on that day, on that day, on that day, the ultimate day. On that day, living water will flow out from Jerusalem. Here we have streams of living water again. Half of it to the east and half of it to the west. The Lord will be king over the whole earth. Let's see. Skip on down to verse 20 at the very end. On that day, holy to the Lord will be inscribed on the bells of the horses, and the cooking pots in the Lord's house will be like the sacred bowls in front of the altar. Holy to the Lord is what was engraved on the gold plate worn on the high priest's turban. It's a reminder of being consecrated to the Lord's service. And apparently what this is talking about is about God's people returning to their original consecrated role. So things are going to be tough, but God is in charge and he's going to take care of them. And when he sets all things right, even the cooking pots are going to be sacred because everything will belong to God. Every pot in Jerusalem and Judah will be holy to the Lord Almighty, and all who come to sacrifice will take some of the pots and cook in them. And on that day, there will no longer be a Canaanite in the house of the Lord Almighty. This is a time when even the most common things will be sacred because everything will be dedicated to God. Now, Zechariah is a book of prophecy that is unique. And because it is so often quoted in the New Testament, it has a role of real importance for us, I think. I think it was in the Transforming Word where I read this. Zechariah makes the old prophets, that is the ones before the exile, relevant to a new day. He addresses problems that are current for the people that he's speaking to, the rebuilding of the temple in the first part, and the relationship to Gentile rulers and the meaning of Israel's history in the second part. He reclaims hopeful language and high ethical standards for the people. So Zechariah is calling the people back into an improved relationship with God and telling them that the day of the Lord is coming when everything will be set right, and they need to hope and trust in Yahweh that he will be faithful to them. So Zechariah is an interesting book. Next week, we will look at the second half of that list of dates that I gave you, and we will start Malachi, the last of the three post-exilic prophets. And hopefully by that time, I'll have my Zoom updated and we'll be able to return to our normal exchange. Sorry about the technical difficulties today. I'll see you next week.